18-year-old Cameron Joseph Rhodes stood before Broward County Circuit Court Judge Eleanor Pratt in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on August 24, 2023, wearing an ill-fitting charcoal grey suit over a pressed white dress shirt, his hands trembling slightly at his sides, and his gaze fixed intently on the floor as Judge Pratt prepared to sentence him for the second-degree murder of his best friend, 16-year-old Tyler Vance. The courtroom sat in a heavy, suffocating silence as the prosecutor recounted how Cameron had pointed a .38 caliber revolver at Tyler's chest and pulled the trigger during a staged robbery prank in a deserted parking lot on September 12, 2022. A stunt designed solely to boost the engagement on Tyler's rapidly growing TikTok account. Before we continue with this disturbing case, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. But to understand how a quest for internet celebrity ended in a pool of blood on hot asphalt, we must look beyond the tragic courtroom scene to the digital footprint left behind. For the 11 months between the shooting and the sentencing, investigators pieced together a harrowing timeline of obsession from the data extracted from Cameron's iPhone 12 Pro. The most chilling piece of evidence was not the weapon itself, but a deleted video draft found in the recently deleted folder, time-stamped just moments after the fatal shot. The footage captured Tyler clutching his chest, gasping for air as the life drained from his eyes, while Cameron's voice could be heard from behind the camera, not calling 911, but whispering with terrifying focus, "Don't die yet, Ty. The lighting is perfect. We're going to hit 1 million tonight." 18-year-old Elias James Vance stood before Hennepin County District Court Judge Martha Holton Dimmick in Minneapolis, Minnesota, on September 14, 2023, wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit that contrasted deeply with the pale, sickly pallor of his skin. His signature bleach blonde hair, once the center of his online brand, had been shaved down to a severe buzz cut, and his eyes, usually wide and animated for the camera, were glazed and heavy-lidded as Judge Dimmick prepared to sentence him for the second-degree intentional murder of 16-year-old Tobias Toby Clark, his former friend, collaborator, and the unwitting victim of a stunt designed solely to conquer the TikTok algorithm. Before we continue with this harrowing case into the dark side of social media stardom, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. What chilled the blood of everyone present in the gallery was not just the brutality of the crime, but Elias's reaction to the gravity of the proceeding. As the charges were read, detailing how he had lured Toby to a deserted location under false pretenses, Elias did not look at the grieving Clark family. He did not look at the judge. Instead, he stared fixatedly at the polished reflection of the defense table, adjusting his tie and checking his profile, treating the courtroom glass like a viewfinder, seemingly more concerned with his angles than the life sentence looming over him. But to understand how a suburban teenager transformed into a cold-blooded killer obsessed with analytics, we must go back to the environment that cultivated his narcissism. Elias Vance was born on January 12, 2005, into a home that was less a family unit and more a content production studio. Raised in the affluent suburb of Edina, Minnesota, Elias was the son of two marketing executives who viewed their child's life through the lens of shareability. By the time Elias was 10, his bedroom had been outfitted with professional ring lights, green screens, and soundproofing foam. Neighbours reported that the Vance household was often unnervingly quiet, save for the muffled shouts of Elias performing skits late into the night. There were no family dinners, only mukbangs filmed for views. There were no private milestones, only vlogs. By 2021, 16-year-old Elias had amassed a modest but devoted following of 10,000 users on TikTok. However, forensic analysis of his journals and hard drives revealed a dangerous obsession. He wasn't satisfied. He tracked his engagement rates with clinical precision on a whiteboard next to his bed, writing in red marker, "Controversy kayaks cash," and "Empathy is a filter, turn it off." His search history from this period was a roadmap to disaster. Between December 2021 and February 2022, Elias searched terms such as "how to make a tragedy go viral," "accidental death caught on camera laws," and "how much do grieving families make from interviews?" Enter Tobias Clark. 16-year-old Toby Clark was the antithesis of Elias, described by his English teacher, Mrs. Gable, as "a soul too gentle for this century." Toby was an aspiring cinematographer who saw Elias not as a rival, but as a mentor. Toby didn't care about the fame. He loved the art of editing. He spent his weekends volunteering at the local animal shelter and had recently saved enough money to buy his first professional camera, a Canon EOS R, which he treated with reverence. His mother, Sarah Clark, recalled that Toby was thrilled when Elias invited him to collaborate on a high-stakes urban exploration video. He thought he had finally found a best friend, Sarah told investigators later. He didn't know he was just a prop. The tragedy unfolded with terrifying precision on the night of August 18th, 2022. Around 11:30 p.m., Elias drove Toby to the abandoned Grainbelt Brewery complex in northeast Minneapolis. The location was isolated, crumbling, and strictly off-limits, the perfect backdrop for the narrative Elias had constructed. According to data recovered from Toby's cloud account, the two boys entered the main fermentation hall at 11:42 p.m. The plan, as pitched to Toby, was to film a scare prank where they would encounter a squatter. However, the raw footage recovered from Elias's phone, which he had attempted to delete, told a different story. At 11:55 p.m., Elias instructed Toby to stand near the edge of a rusted catwalk, 4 stories above the concrete floor, to get the perfect lighting for the thumbnail. The video shows Toby hesitating, clutching his camera strap, asking, "Is this safe, Elias? The railing looks loose." Elias's voice, calm and directive from behind the camera, replied, "Do it for the shot, Toby. Don't be a coward. The internet loves a risk." As Toby turned to adjust his lens, the camera captures Elias putting his phone down, propping it against a piece of rebar to keep recording. Elias then picked up a heavy 2-foot length of iron pipe he had staged nearby. The footage captures the sickening sound of impact as Elias swung the pipe, striking Toby in the back of the legs. It was not a fatal blow, but it was calculated. Toby crumbled, screaming in pain and confusion, his legs dangling over the precipice. "Elias, help me! Help me!" Toby screamed, clutching the rusted grating. Elias did not help. He stepped back into the frame of the recording phone, checked his hair, and looked directly into the lens. "This is going to blow up," he whispered. Then, with a shove of his boot, he kicked Toby's hands free from the grating. Tobias Clark fell 40 feet to the concrete below. For the next 20 minutes, Elias did not call 911. Instead, he descended the stairs to where Toby lay broken and barely breathing. The forensic pathology report indicated that Toby suffered a shattered pelvis, 2 collapsed lungs, and severe cranial trauma. But he did not die instantly. He lay there in agony for approximately 18 minutes. During those 18 minutes, Elias Vance live-streamed the aftermath on a secondary burner account titled Project Aftermath. He filmed Toby's dying breaths, narrating the scene with feigned panic, fake crying for the audience of 12 people watching the stream, asking them to smash the like button so the algorithm would push the stream to more viewers to get help. He even zoomed in on the blood pooling around Toby's head, captioning the stream, "Friend falls from roof," not clickbait. It was only when Toby finally stopped moving at 12:17 a.m. that Elias dialed 911, delivering a rehearsed performance of a distraught friend who had just witnessed a terrible accident. Back in the courtroom, the weight of these details seemed to have no effect on the defendant. As the prosecution played the recovered video of the fall, a clip that had been mercifully scrubbed from the internet but preserved for evidence, Elias Vance did not look away. He watched the screen with a critical eye, almost as if he were critiquing the framing of his own crime. When Sarah Clark took the stand to deliver her victim impact statement, the courtroom wept. She spoke of Toby's unfinished drawings, his empty seat at the dinner table, and the camera he had worked so hard for, which was found smashed beside his body. "My son was not content," she sobbed, gripping the podium until her knuckles turned white. "He was a boy who wanted to create beauty, and he was murdered by a boy who only wanted to create traffic." Throughout her statement, Elias sat at the defense table, picking at a loose thread on his suit cuff. At one point, he leaned over to his defense attorney and whispered something. The attorney stiffened and shook his head. Later, it was revealed that Elias had asked if the presence of news cameras in the courtroom would boost his verified status on Instagram. When Judge Dimmick finally offered Elias the opportunity to speak before sentencing, the 19-year-old stood up. He did not apologize. He did not ask for forgiveness. He smoothed the lapels of his charcoal suit, looked directly at the court sketch artist and said, "I just want to say to my followers, thanks for sticking with me. The engagement on this trial has been crazy. Check the link in my bio." A gasp of collective horror sucked the air out of the room. Judge Dimmick, visibly shaking with rage, slammed her gavel down. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice trembling with controlled fury, "in my 30 years on the bench, I have seen crimes of passion, crimes of greed, and crimes of desperation. But I have never seen a crime of such hollow, vapid vanity. You are not a celebrity. You are a void." She sentenced him to 40 years in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. As the bailiffs moved to handcuff him, Elias Vance shouted one last thing to the gallery. 40 years. That's plenty of time to write a book. Pre-orders start now." As he was led away, the boy who killed for fame finally got his wish. All eyes were on him. But they weren't looking at a star. They were looking at a monster. Which begs the question, in an age where attention is the ultimate currency, how many more aspiring influencers are one bad algorithm shift away from becoming the next Elias Vance? And when the camera finally stops rolling, is the silence that follows justice, or just a pause before the next upload? 17-year-old Jared Michael Thorne stood before Oakland County Circuit Court Judge Mary Ellen Brennan in Pontiac, Michigan, on May 14, 2024. Wearing a pressed white dress shirt that hung loosely on his thin frame and standard-issue khaki trousers, his dark hair swept to the side, and his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall just above the judge's head as she prepared to sentence him for the first-degree murder of 16-year-old Elias James Vance. The courtroom was suffused with a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the soft weeping of Elias's mother in the front row. Jared looked like any other teenager you might see in a high school yearbook, clean-cut, unassuming, almost bored. But what chilled the blood of everyone present was the subtle, rhythmic tapping of Jared's left foot against the leg of the defense table. Not a nervous tick, but a steady beat, as if he were listening to a song only he could hear, completely detached from the gravity of the life sentence hanging over him. When the prosecutor played the video evidence recovered from his phone, Jared didn't look away in shame. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, studying the screen with the critical gaze of a director reviewing his work. But to understand how we got here, how a suburban teenager transformed into a cold-blooded killer over a follower count, we must go back to the sweltering heat of late summer, where a digital obsession began to bleed into a violent reality. August 2023 marked the beginning of the end for Elias Vance, while Jared Thorne lived in a sprawling 2-story brick home in a quiet cul-de-sac of Bloomfield Hills. Inside, the walls were cold. Investigators would later describe the Thorne residence as sterile, a place where Jared spent up to 14 hours a day, locked in his bedroom, bathed in the blue light of 3 monitors, building an identity entirely dependent on the validation of strangers. His search history from this period, later projected onto the courtroom screens, revealed a mind rapidly unraveling. Amid searches for how to boost engagement and viral algorithms, there were darker queries entered at 3:14 a.m. on August 10th. Age of criminal responsibility Michigan. How much force to break a trachea? And does adrenaline stop pain? Jared viewed life through a lens of metrics. People were not human beings. They were data points, competitors, or obstacles. And in August, Elias Vance became his primary obstacle. Elias was everything Jared was not. Living in a modest apartment in nearby Troy, Elias used his platform to share his passion for urban exploration and street dance. He was charismatic, authentic, and rapidly gaining traction, crossing the 10,000 follower threshold on August 12, 2023. He didn't care about the numbers. He cared about the community. He posted videos of himself teaching his younger sister to dance or helping his grandmother cook traditional recipes. His friends described him as the light of the room, a boy who dreamed of opening a dance studio to keep kids off the streets. He had a laugh that was infectious, the kind that made you feel like you were part of an inside joke, and a spirit that radiated kindness. But to Jared Thorne, Elias's success was a personal insult. On August 14th, the digital rivalry began in earnest. It started with a comment Jared left on one of Elias's most popular videos. "Watch your back. The fall is faster than the climb." Elias, naive to the depth of Jared's malice, replied with a simple, confused emoji. This lack of engagement infuriated Jared. Over the next 2 weeks, the harassment escalated with terrifying precision. Jared created 17 burner accounts, flooding Elias's comment sections with derogatory slurs and threats. But the most damning evidence, the pieces of the puzzle that drew gasps from the gallery during the trial, were the private voice memos Jared recorded on his own phone, diaries of a developing killer. In a recording time-stamped August 24th at 11:42 p.m., Jared whispered into his microphone, his voice trembling not with rage, but with excitement. "He thinks he's famous. I'm going to make him infamous. I'm going to turn his screen black, and everyone will be watching me." Before we continue with the details of this harrowing timeline, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. The psychological profile presented by the prosecution painted Jared as a malignant narcissist with a complete lack of empathy. While Elias was planning a collaborative meetup for his followers to clean up a local park, Jared was planning an ambush. He mapped out the park's CCTV blind spots, downloading schematics of the area and marking specific locations with red digital ink. He wasn't just a troll, he was a hunter. On August 29th, Jared purchased a 6-inch tactical survival knife online using his mother's credit card. When the package arrived, he filmed an unboxing video. It was never posted, but police found it in his deleted folder. In the video, Jared holds the blade up to the ring light, admiring the glint of the steel, and says, "Content is king, and I'm about to take the throne." In the courtroom, as these details were read aloud, the contrast between the two boys became heartbreakingly clear. Elias Vance had spent his final days trying to build something positive, telling his mother, "I think I can really make a difference with this, Mom." He was looking at colleges, dreaming of a future in marketing or dance therapy. Jared Thorne had spent those same days sharpening a blade and fantasizing about the engagement numbers a murder would generate. When Judge Brennan finally asked Jared if he had anything to say before sentencing, the room held its breath, hoping for a crack in the facade, a moment of realization of the horror he had inflicted on the Vance family. Jared stood up, smoothed his white shirt, and looked directly at the camera used for the court's livestream. A faint, chilling smirk played on his lips as he spoke. "I just want to thank my fans for sticking with me," he said, his voice steady and devoid of emotion. "Check the bio for the update." Judge Brennan stared at him, her face hardening into a mask of absolute resolve. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned atmosphere, "you seem to believe that notoriety is a currency. You traded a human life for attention. But in this court, the only currency is justice." She then sentenced Jared Michael Thorne to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that his quest for digital fame would end in a concrete cell, offline and forgotten. As the bailiffs moved to shackle Jared's hands, he didn't look at his weeping mother or the devastated family of Elias Vance. He craned his neck to look at the gallery, seemingly counting the number of eyes upon him, satisfied that for one final terrible moment, he was the center of attention. This case forces us to ask a terrifying question about the digital age we live in. When the line between content and reality blurs, and the thirst for validation outweighs the value of human life, how do we protect our children from becoming casualties of an algorithm? 17-year-old Elias James Thorne stood before Wayne County Circuit Judge Timothy Kenny in the cramped fluorescent-lit courtroom in Detroit, Michigan, on October 14, 2023. He wore a crisp, oversized charcoal suit that swallowed his slender frame, his dark hair parted severely to the left, and his eyes hidden behind wire-rimmed glasses that gave him the appearance of a studious, misunderstood academic rather than a killer. Judge Kenny shuffled a thick stack of pre-sentencing investigation reports, preparing to hand down the sentence for the second-degree murder of 16-year-old Julian Jules Baker, the aspiring graphic artist and childhood neighbor whom Elias had shot through the chest during a live-stream stunt inside an abandoned Packard automotive plant. Before we continue with this disturbing case, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. But what truly chilled the blood of everyone present in the gallery was not Elias's youth, nor the formal gravity of the proceedings, but his absolute boredom. As the prosecution played the recovered footage of Julian's final moments, audio that captured the boy pleading for the camera to be turned off, Elias did not look away, nor did he cry. Instead, he picked at a loose thread on his suit cuff, checked his wrist for a watch that had been confiscated months ago, and stifled a yawn, looking for all the world like a teenager waiting out a tedious detention, rather than facing 25 years to life in a state penitentiary. To understand how a friendship ends in a pool of blood on a concrete floor, we must go back to the environment that nurtured this apathy. Elias Thorne grew up in a sprawling, silent home in Grosse Pointe, the son of two high-powered corporate attorneys who were physically present but emotionally ghostly. Investigators would later describe Elias's bedroom not as a sanctuary, but as a command center. 3 monitors dominated the space, surrounded by Ring lights, high-fidelity microphones, and a whiteboard tracking follower metrics in red marker. His search history, recovered by forensic analysts, painted a portrait of a mind hollowing out. Interspersed between searches for Viral Trends 2023 and Best Lighting for Night Shoots were queries that grew progressively darker. How much bleed out is safe, legal defenses for prank accidents, and reaction compilations to death. Julian Baker was the antithesis of this calculated coldness. At 16, Julian was the vibrant, chaotic heart of his friend group. He filled sketchbooks with charcoal drawings of the Detroit skyline, rescued stray cats, and possessed a laugh that his mother, Sarah Baker, described in her victim impact statement as the sound that made our house a home. Julian followed Elias not out of a desire for fame, but out of a misplaced loyalty to a lonely boy who had convinced him that they were partners in art, not accomplices in a dangerous game of numbers. On the night of August 12, 2023, around 10:15 p.m., the 2 boys entered the derelict shell of the old automotive plant on the city's east side. The location was chosen for its acoustics and its grim aesthetic, a backdrop Elias believed would retain viewer retention. At 10:42 p.m., Elias initiated the livestream on his phone, titled No Flinch Challenge Extreme Edition. The footage, which has since been scrubbed from the internet but remains evidence in the court record, shows the escalation. For 20 minutes, Elias berates Julian for low energy, urging in him to stand closer to the edge of a drop-off, to hold a knife, to act scared. Julian looks tired. He wears a faded vintage t-shirt and keeps glancing at the exit, asking if they can just film a vlog and go home. Elias ignores him, his eyes glued to the chat scrolling rapidly on his screen. Then, Elias pulls the weapon, a legally registered 9mm Sig Sauer pistol he had stolen from his father's safe 2 days prior. He tells the audience, now numbering over 4,000 concurrent viewers, that the gun is empty. He tells Julian the same. But the ballistic evidence and the magazine recovered at the scene proved that Elias had loaded the weapon with hollow point ammunition just hours before leaving his house. The climax of the stream occurs at 11:08 p.m. Elias points the weapon at Julian's chest from a distance of 4 feet. Julian raises a hand, his palm open, and says, "Eli, don't. It's not funny anymore." Elias looks at the camera, smiles a tight, practiced smile, and pulls the trigger. The sound is not a bang, but a flat, deafening crack that overwhelms the microphone. Julian crumples instantly, the bullet tearing through his right lung and severing his aorta. He hits the concrete with a sickening thud. What happens next is the centerpiece of the prosecution's argument for depravity. Elias does not drop the phone. He does not rush to his friend's side. He does not call 911 for 18 seconds. An eternity in a courtroom silence. Elias Thorne keeps the camera steady on Julian's convulsing body. He zooms in. He checks the viewer count, which is skyrocketing. "Oh my God," he says, his voice devoid of panic, pitched perfectly for drama. "Chat, did you see that? Clip that. Somebody clip that." Only when Julian stops moving does Elias finally end the stream, not to call for help, but to upload the VOD file to a private cloud server. Back in the courtroom, Judge Kenny stared down at the 19-year-old defendant, whose expression remained a mask of indifference. The judge noted that in the pre-sentencing interview, when asked if he would change anything about that night, Elias had complained that the lighting in the warehouse was suboptimal for the footage quality. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Kenny said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage, "you traded a human life for digital applause. You sacrificed a friend for an algorithm. There is a hollowness in you that this court cannot fill, and a danger to this community that I must contain." As the gavel came down, sentencing Elias Thorne to 40 to 60 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections, the boy finally showed emotion. He rolled his eyes, turned to the weeping Baker family, and whispered a single word: cringe. It forces us to ask a terrifying question about the age we live in. When the camera is always on, and the audience is always hungry, where does the performance end and the humanity begin? And is 40 years enough for a boy who watched his best friend die and worried about the frame rate? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. 17-year-old Elias James Jensen stood before Ramsey County District Court Judge Thomas Gilligan in the suffocatingly quiet courtroom in St. Paul, Minnesota, on October 14, 2023. He wore a standard-issue orange prison jumpsuit that hung loosely on his slender frame, his wrists bound in steel shackles that clinked softly against the defense table as he shifted his weight. His dark hair was swept back, styled with the same meticulous care he had once reserved for his social media appearances, and his expression remained eerily detached as Judge Gilligan prepared to sentence him for the first-degree premeditated murder of 16-year-old Marcus Thorne, a fellow student and rising online personality whom Elias had lured to an abandoned grain silo and stabbed to death, all in a desperate, calculated bid to hijack Marcus's audience and viral fame. The boy looked like a child, barely old enough to drive, but his eyes were cold, darting around the room not with fear, but with a strange, performative curiosity, as if he were checking camera angles rather than facing a life sentence. Before we continue with this harrowing case, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. But to understand how we got here, we must go back to the disturbing digital trail that unraveled the mind of a killer obsessed with metrics over morality. Investigators tasked with analyzing Elias's seized electronics found themselves staring into an abyss of envy and calculation. The most damning evidence resided not in a weapon, but in the Notes app of his iPhone 13 Pro. Detectives discovered a document titled The Takeover, created 3 months prior to the murder. It contained a step-by-step checklist. Item 1 read, "Find the target." Item 2, "Create the tragedy." Item 3, "Reaction video, morning phase." It was a script for murder, written with the casual tone of a content calendar. Search history logs from the family's shared Wi-Fi router painted an even darker picture of the atmosphere inside the Jensen home. Between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., In the weeks leading up to the crime, Elias had searched for terms including how long until a missing person creates a trend, arterial bleed-out time, and YouTube analytics for grieving friends. While his parents slept down the hall, believing their son was merely gaming or studying, Elias was researching the algorithm of death. On the morning of November 12, 2022, around 8:42 a.m., the plan moved from digital fantasy to brutal reality. Elias convinced Marcus to meet him at the derelict industrial park on the edge of town under the guise of filming a collaborative video that would boost both their followings. Marcus Thorne arrived with his camera equipment, trusting a peer he believed was a friend. Marcus was a gentle soul, known to his family as a budding graphic designer who spent his weekends teaching his younger sister how to skateboard. He dreamed of attending art school in Chicago. His mother, Sarah Thorne, later described him as the color in their black and white world, a boy who would stop to help strangers carry groceries and whose laughter could fill the quietest room. That laughter was silenced permanently inside the echoing concrete of the grain silo. Forensic evidence showed that Elias attacked Marcus from behind. Yet, the horror did not end with the violence. Recovered cloud data revealed that immediately after the murder, at 9:15 a.m., Elias recorded a 13-second video of himself standing over Marcus's body. He didn't post it, but he saved it. In the video, Elias checks his hair in the front-facing camera, adjusts the lighting, and whispers, "Content is king." Back in the courtroom, as the prosecutor detailed these specific, stomach-churning facts, the composure of the gallery crumbled. But what truly horrified everyone who witnessed the proceedings was Elias's reaction to the suffering he had manufactured. During the victim impact statements, as Marcus's father struggled to speak through agonizing sobs, describing the empty chair at their dinner table, Elias Jensen did not look down in shame. Instead, he leaned over to his defense attorney and was overheard asking if the news crews in the back were filming live or for the evening broadcast. He seemed annoyed by the lack of direct attention, tapping his fingers impatiently against the table, treating his sentencing hearing like a production delay rather than a judgment on his soul. When Judge Gilligan finally offered Elias the opportunity to speak, the courtroom braced for an apology. Elias stood up, smoothed the front of his orange jumpsuit, looked directly at the Thorne family and said, "I just wanted to say, if you check the engagement numbers, Marcus is more famous now than he ever would have been. I did that for him." Judge Gilligan stared at the teenager for a long, heavy silence before delivering the sentence. "Mr. Jensen, you have traded a human life for pixels and attention. You sought an audience and now you have one. But you will not find fame where you are going. You will find only obscurity." The gavel came down, sealing Elias's fate to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led him away, Elias turned one last time to the gallery, not to wave goodbye to his weeping mother, but to smirk at the sketch artist. It leaves us with a terrifying question to consider in this age of digital obsession. When the line between content and reality blurs so violently, does a life sentence truly punish someone who only fears being offline? 16-year-old Elias James Thorne stood before Oakland County Circuit Court Judge Mary Ellen Brennan in Pontiac, Michigan, on October 14, 2023, wearing an ill-fitting charcoal grey suit that swallowed his slender frame, his jet-black hair styled in a messy, deliberate fringe that obscured his eyes as Judge Brennan prepared to sentence him for the first-degree premeditated murder of 16-year-old Caleb Michael Reeds. The atmosphere in the courtroom was not just tense, it was suffocating. The air seemed heavy with the collective grief of a community that had watched a digital nightmare bleed into reality. Thorne, despite the gravity of the life sentence hanging over his head, did not tremble. He did not weep. Instead, he shifted his weight from foot to foot, occasionally glancing at the courtroom camera, with a faint, almost imperceptible nod of recognition. What chilled the blood of every deputy, clerk, and family member present was not the boy's youth, but his eyes. They were devoid of fear. They were dead, flat, and bored. It was the look of a child who had forgotten that the people around him were flesh and blood, not pixels on a screen. Before we continue with this harrowing case, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. But to understand how a quest for internet virality ended in a pool of blood on a factory floor, we must go back to the environment that created Elias Thorne. Elias grew up in the affluent suburb of Bloomfield Hills, inside a sprawling, modernist home that neighbors referred to as the Glass Box. To the outside world, he had everything: the latest consoles, high-speed fiber internet, and parents who were successful corporate attorneys. But inside the home, emotional silence reigned. Forensic analysis of the family's digital footprint later revealed that between 2020 and 2022, Elias spent an average of 14 hours a day online. His search history, recovered by cyber forensics experts from his seized iPhone 13 Pro, painted a disturbing trajectory of desensitization. In early 2021, the searches were innocuous: how to get more followers, viral trends 2021, best lighting for streams. By mid-2022, the algorithm of his life had darkened. The search terms shifted to how much force to break a nose, can you stream on the dark web, and most chillingly, legal age for murder charges in Michigan. Elias was no longer looking for connection. He was looking for notoriety. He had convinced himself that infamy was a currency equal to fame, and he was ready to cash out. On the morning of November 18, 2022, around 7:30 a.m., Elias sent a text message to Caleb Reeds. Caleb was everything Elias was not: warm, artistic, and universally liked by his peers at Bloomfield Hills High. Caleb was an aspiring architect who spent his lunch breaks sketching skylines in a battered moleskin notebook. He considered Elias a friend, a slightly eccentric loner who needed someone to talk to. That kindness would be his undoing. The text read, "Found a spot for the Urban X Stream, the old textile mill on Saginaw. Lighting is perfect. We go live at midnight. Trust me, this will blow up." Caleb replied 2 minutes later, "I'm in. Let me tell my mum I'm staying at yours." At 11:42 p.m. that night, the two boys entered the abandoned Pontiac textile mill. The location was a decaying cavern of rusted machinery and graffiti-stained concrete. Elias set up a tripod facing a singular harsh beam of moonlight cutting through the broken roof. He didn't open TikTok. He opened a private, encrypted streaming app he had been promoting on various underground forums for weeks. At 11:55 p.m., the stream went live. The audience was small: 10,000 followers who had subscribed for extreme pranks. What they saw was not a prank. Without a word of warning, as Caleb stood admiring the industrial architecture, Elias produced a hunting knife with a 6-inch serrated blade from his waistband. He struck with a terrifying mechanical precision. The first blow severed the radial artery in Caleb's left arm as he raised it in defense. The video, which was played in closed court to a jury that was visibly weeping, showed Caleb falling to the concrete, confusion morphing into terror. He didn't scream for help. He screamed Elias's name, asking why, over and over again. Elias did not answer. He didn't even look at his dying friend. His eyes were locked on the phone screen, checking the viewer count. As Caleb Reeds took his final, ragged breaths on the cold, dirty floor of the mill, Elias Thorne adjusted his hair in the camera lens and whispered to his audience, "Are you watching? Tell me you're watching." The stream lasted 8 minutes and 12 seconds. Caleb was pronounced dead at the scene by paramedics who arrived 30 minutes later, alerted not by the killer, but by a horrified viewer in Ohio, who called 911. Back in the courtroom, nearly a year later, the weight of that night crushed everyone present, everyone except Elias. During the trial, the defense attempted to argue that Elias suffered from a dissociative disorder induced by social media addiction, a digital psychosis that rendered him unable to distinguish between the stream and reality. But the prosecution dismantled this with a single piece of evidence, a note found in the drafts folder of Elias's phone, written 3 days before the murder. It read simply, "Content is king, blood is red, make them remember you." The most heartbreaking moment of the sentencing came when Caleb's mother, Sarah Reeds, took the stand. She was a small woman, trembling as she clutched the sketchbook that had been returned to her by the police, blood-stained on the edges. She looked directly at Elias, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't just kill my son," she sobbed, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "You stole the future. You stole the skyscrapers he would have built. You stole a father from children who will never be born. And for what? For a number on a screen. For strangers who don't care if you live or die." The courtroom held its breath, waiting for a reaction, a flinch, a tear, anything. Elias Thorne looked up from the table. He locked eyes with the grieving mother, leaned toward the microphone, and in a voice devoid of any human warmth said, "At least they know my name now." A gasp of collective horror rippled through the gallery. A bailiff actually took a step toward the defendant, his hand instinctively moving to his belt. Judge Brennan's face hardened into a mask of absolute fury. She paused, seemingly gathering her composure to prevent herself from shouting, before she delivered her final judgment. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Brennan began, her voice low and trembling with controlled rage. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have seen crimes of passion, crimes of greed, and crimes of desperation. But I have never seen a crime of such hollow, vapid narcissism. You sacrificed a human life at the altar of your own ego. You treated Caleb Reeds not as a person, but as a prop for your own amusement." She leaned forward, her eyes boring into him. "You wanted an audience, Elias. You wanted to be seen. So let this be the last thing the world sees of you. Under Michigan law, for the crime of first-degree murder, I sentence you to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. You will never stream again. You will never upload again. You will fade into the obscurity you fear so much, and you will do it inside a concrete box every single day until you die." As the gavel came down with a thunderous crack, sealing Elias's fate, the 19-year-old's mask finally slipped. For a split second, the arrogance vanished, replaced by the terrified realization of a child who had just realized the game was over and there was no reset button. Elias Thorne was escorted out of the courtroom in shackles, the sounds of his chains clinking against the floor, the only noise in the stunned room. He had killed for fame, trading his life and Caleb's for 10 minutes of attention. Now, he faces a lifetime of silence. But as we look at this tragedy, we are left with a haunting question, one that extends far beyond the walls of the Oakland County Courthouse. In a world where attention is the ultimate currency, and where algorithms reward the shocking and the violent, are we merely observers of these tragedies? Or are we, by our clicks and our views, accomplices? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The sentencing of 17-year-old Elijah Vance did not bring closure to the shattered community of Oak Creek. Rather, it solidified a terrifying reality about the cost of digital validation. The courtroom in Milwaukee County fell into a heavy, suffocating silence as Judge Miriam Costner delivered her final remarks, condemning not just the violence, but the narcissistic nihilism that fueled it. The trial exposed a motive that was as modern as it was depraved. Liam Carter was not killed for money, jealousy, or revenge. He was killed for engagement metrics. The prosecution's evidence, a series of deleted drafts and analytic screenshots found on Elijah's cloud storage, proved that the murder was premeditated, staged, and executed solely to optimize a viewing algorithm. As of December 2025, Elijah Vance remains incarcerated at the Green Bay Correctional Institution. Following the jury's guilty verdict on charges of first-degree intentional homicide and reckless endangerment, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 40 years. He wears the standard-issue orange jumpsuit of a high-security inmate, a stark contrast to the designer streetwear he once flaunted in his uploads. The smartphone that acted as his window to the world now sits in a sealed evidence bag in the basement of the district attorney's office, its battery dead, its screen cracked, and its connection to the internet permanently severed. The 10,000 followers Elijah sought to impress have long since moved on, their attention spans shifting to the next viral trend, leaving him alone in a 6 by 8 foot concrete cell where no one is watching. For the family of 16-year-old Liam Carter, the sentence offers legal justice, but no relief from the agonizing silence that now fills their home. Liam's bedroom remains exactly as he left it on that Tuesday morning in November. His chemistry textbook open on the desk, his unlaced sneakers by the door, and his wrestling trophies gathering dust on the shelf. These physical remnants stand as a silent testament to a future that was stolen for a fleeting moment of notoriety. The horrifying truth of this case is that while the video was scrubbed from the servers and the comments section disabled, the absence of a beloved son and brother is permanent. There is no refresh button for a human life. But Elijah Vance is not an anomaly. He is a symptom of a darker systemic pattern where the lines between reality and performance blur with deadly consequences. To understand how deep this fracture goes, and how the very code governing our screens can manipulate the human mind into acts of extreme violence, you need to see the story we've uncovered next. Click the video on your screen now as we investigate the algorithm murders, examining a case where a live stream turned deadly and the specific lines of code that pushed a lonely teenager over the edge.